Welcome back, students. As we start session 8, we're going to ask ourselves, why did the First Continental Congress meet? In order to review the event, we're going to use something called an event map and really just think about it as if it's a web, right? So if we have the event in the middle, we're going to think about where did it take place and when, but more specifically, what happened, who was involved, how did it happen, and why was it important? So as we watch this video that takes us through the purpose and outcome of the First Continental Congress, I'll take time to pause that video and jot down any of the answers we come across to these questions. That way, when we're done watching the video, we'll have some information to hold on to moving forward to understand and reflect back on why the First Continental Congress met, what they accomplished, and what was its impact in the road to the American Revolutionary War. So let's go ahead to that video. I'm going to pause if I hear anything along the lines of when, where, and who.
Remember that time a bunch of angry colonists dressed up as Native Americans and threw case after case of tea into Boston Harbor? Yes, the Boston Tea Party. Well, the British government punished the Bostonians with something called the Coercive Acts. The Coercive Acts came in the form of 4 separate acts. First, the British Parliament ordered the Boston colonists to pay for the tea that had been thrown in the harbor. Second, the Parliament took power away from the colonial legislature and gave it to a royal governor. Unlike the colonial legislature, the royal governor was a representative of the king and Parliament, not the colonists. Third, the Boston colonists were forced to let British soldiers live in their homes. This is known as the Quartering Act. Quartering means to accommodate someone by giving them housing. The fourth and final act allowed British government officials who committed crimes in the colonies to go home to England to stand trial. This angered the colonists because they felt the English courts would be too easy on the government officials and they wouldn't actually be punished for their crimes. The colonists found this intolerable, I tell you, so the Coercive Acts have come to be known as the Intolerable Acts. In September of 1774, 12 of the 13 colonies meet in what becomes known as the First Continental Congress.
I'm going to pause right there, and I learned a couple of bits of information that I want to document. So in that video, I already went ahead and put a post-it to mention that our event is the First Continental Congress. She just mentioned that it took place in September of 1774 in Philadelphia, and that the what was 12 of the 13 colonies met. So 12 representatives, that is, of 12 of the 13 colonies or states joined together at this meeting.
Some important future members of the United States government were in attendance, like Samuel Adams, George Washington, and Patrick Henry. The men discussed how they should deal with the British and the Intolerable Acts.
So right there we get the who and the why. So if I were to go back to our event map, who is involved? The main representatives she pointed out were Samuel Adams, George Washington, and Patrick Henry. And what their goal was to try and decide how to respond to Britain's intolerable acts.
They decided to form a continental association, which would unite the colonies together in an economic union. Economic means relating to money or profit. They agreed that the colonies would no longer sell any of their raw goods like cotton, indigo dye, and lumber across the Atlantic to England. They also agreed to no longer buy any manufactured goods from England, like paper, tea, or paint. This refusal to trade is known as an embargo.
So right there we're learning that that was the colonists' response. So when they created the Continental Association, bringing all those colonies together as one, they all agreed not to trade with Britain, either take their goods or send goods to them because they're mad and not agreeing with the Intolerable Act. So this is their response.
The colonists hoped that these measures would be enough to get the British to overturn the Intolerable Acts. Let's review. The colonists were punished for the Boston Tea Party with the Coercive Acts. They had to pay for the tea they threw in the harbor. Their legislature was replaced with a royal governor, They were forced to quarter troops, and British officials who broke laws in the colonies were allowed to go on trial at home in England. The colonists found this intolerable. So representatives of the colonies, like Patrick Henry, George Washington, and Samuel Adams, met at the First Continental Congress and set up a Continental Association, which refused to sell the British any raw goods like cotton, indigo dye, and lumber, and also refused to buy any British manufactured goods like paper, tea, or paint. The colonies ended the meeting called the First Continental Congress by agreeing to meet 1 year later in May of 1775. Little did they know that by that time they would already be fighting the British in the Revolutionary War.
So as that video concludes, the last thing about why it was important was that they agreed to meet 1 year later in 1776 or 1775, that is, to discuss their next steps, see if their embargo and agreeing not to trade with Britain, what impact that had. Things moved a lot slower, as you can imagine, back then. Nowadays, we could send an email, pick up a phone call, or pick up a phone that is and have a phone call to discuss these matters. However, back then, the communication took much longer. So having this meeting in September and then going out to execute it and seeing the impact would take about a year. And then that's when, like we said, they would see the results. Little did they know they'd be involved in that American Revolutionary War. Now that we have watched that previous video about the First Continental Congress, there's another video I'd like you to watch on your own, and it is linked on this page in your digital notebook shown here. And if there's anything you want to add that is new information that was different, or just new information from the previous video, in your paper journal you'll have the event map that I'm highlighting here, and you can jot that down. But on the other hand, your job will be to watch this video. It's very short, it's only 1 minute and 20 seconds. What's really nice about this video, however, is it's a reenactment, which means actors are trying to portray what the events looked like back in 1774. So you're going to see people and actors dressed as they would have if they were a representative in the First Continental Congress. This is a reenactment of the building. And as you watch, it may even be better to watch it twice. I know I had to. It just helps you to digest and connect who is who and what's maybe going on, to connect that we learned during the First Continental Congress that the representatives from 12 of the 13 colonies came together. They were trying to figure out what to do about the intolerable acts. Some were trying to still make peace with England. Some were saying, no, we need our independence. So as you watch these characters reenact those events, pay attention to those events coming alive in front of you. And as I mentioned, maybe it might be helpful to watch it more than once.